If you've already watched my video about why I think Mojang is planning on adding different wood colors, you may remember that I pointed out how crimson and warped doors are different from all of the other doors in the game so far. The difference is that while the crimson and warped doors have no transparent portions, the trapdoors do. Meanwhile, with all of the other doors, if a door was solid, its trapdoor would be solid too. Iron, oak, jungle, and acacia doors have transparent portions, so their trapdoors also have transparent portions. Meanwhile, spruce, birch, and dark oak all have solid doors and solid trapdoors. I also found it odd that if my conclusion is correct and Mojang is going to use mushroom stems to provide the equivalent of white dyed wood, why does the game still track them as being different? What I mean is that in Bedrock Edition, the stems of huge brown and red mushrooms drop their respective small mushrooms when broken without Silk Touch. However, I do need to apologize because in the last video I mistakenly said that the stems of red and brown mushrooms do not stack in Java Edition. After asking a friend of mine to test it out and consulting the wiki, it appears that they do indeed stack and have stacked since Java Edition 1.13. In my defense, 2018 was a chaotic year for me. Regardless, why do the stems drop mushrooms in Bedrock and nothing in Java? The simplest explanation could be that this is temporary. If the current functionality was replaced with the mushroom stem acting more like a wood log in the way that fungi stems do currently, then there would be no need for either version of the game to track if a mushroom stem was associated with a red or brown mushroom. It would be just like how oak trees and the new Azalea tree use the exact same log type. They would use the exact same block with no differences whatsoever. However, there is another possible explanation which could be hinted at by the crimson and warped doors. I have wanted more options for doors and trapdoors for a while. Since Mojang doesn't want to give us vertical slabs, I have been using stacked trapdoors for walls instead. While I especially like the design of the jungle trapdoor for this purpose, I sometimes wish I had a solid version of jungle, oak, acacia, and iron trapdoors. Likewise, I think a version of birch doors and trapdoors with transparent openings would be nice too. Could the fact that warped and crimson doors are solid while the trapdoors have cutouts indicate that Mojang wants this too? Will they release an additional version of warped and crimson doors that have cutouts just like oak, jungle, and acacia currently do? Would they also release a version of warped and crimson trapdoors that are solid just like spruce, dark oak, and birch? But how would you get them? We might be able to gain some insight from the Azalea tree. Some have criticized the fact that the Azalea tree uses the exact same log as the oak tree. Their argument is that this was a missed opportunity for Mojang to add a new wood type. But could it be a clue? What if the oak and Azalea logs and planks looked exactly the same, but produced different doors and trapdoors? Some may argue that it makes no sense for Mojang to reuse the exact same texture for blocks that are functionally different. Ordinarily, I would agree, but this wouldn't be without precedent. As mentioned before, the stems of huge mushrooms appear to be the same, but the game still considers them to be different. Otherwise, mushroom stems couldn't drop mushrooms in Bedrock. Could Mojang be planning something similar with the oak and Azalea? Would the doors and trapdoors crafted from oak planks continue to have transparent cutouts, while the doors and trapdoors crafted from Azalea planks were completely solid? Does that then mean that the reason brown and red mushroom stems are different is because one will provide the solid version of white doors and trapdoors, while the other will provide the versions with cutouts? But what about the other wood types then? What could provide a solid version of acacia? Or a non-solid version of birch? Would Mojang then introduce new fungi to give us the solid equivalent of crimson and warped trapdoors, as well as crimson and warped doors with cutouts? I think this is unlikely, especially since I believe that Mojang eventually wants wood types that represent all of the 16 dye colors. This would mean that in order to cover the remaining 10 dye colors in the game which were not covered by anything mentioned in my previous video, Mojang would have to add 20 different tree-equivalent structures to the game. 20 different plants or fungi. And that's not even counting the counterparts for the wood colors already in the game. That sounds like a lot of work. And after how chaotic the past few years have been, and how hard Mojang has had to work on the Caves and Cliffs update, I wouldn't blame them if they didn't want to make 20 new trees or fungi. So while I'm not completely discounting this explanation, that Azalea wood could provide a solid version of oak doors and trapdoors, I just don't think it's as likely as the alternative. I think oak logs are just a placeholder. On April 14th, 2021, Mojang announced that, due to multiple concerns, they had to delay the release of multiple features, including the updated world generation and archaeology. But how does that impact Azalea trees? After all, these new trees were first shown during Minecraft Live 2020, about 6 months before Mojang announced adjustments to the release schedule. Consider this. Minecraft Live was held in October that year, about 7 months after much of the world was in lockdown. With that drastic change in circumstances, it would be understandable if Mojang decided to take some shortcuts. After all, if they introduced a new wood type, they'd have to design the new door and trapdoor too. When compared with other features they wanted to have ready for 1.17, like skulk sensors and copper, I wouldn't be surprised if a new wood type would get placed on the back burner. In fact, that would probably be the smartest thing to do. Besides, using an existing texture as a placeholder wouldn't be without precedent. In Bedrock Edition, there are two blocks that are not yet implemented in the game: Chiseled Purpur and Smooth Purpur. As of 1.17.10, you can only get these blocks through commands, but they both use the same texture as the normal Purpur blocks. I'll admit this situation is a little different from the Azalea tree, in that these blocks aren't considered the same as Purpur by the game's code the way that the logs of an Azalea tree are literally just oak logs. But I still think it's a point of evidence we shouldn't ignore. Besides, I like the idea that Mojang will give us a new door and trapdoor, possibly with flowers or something else we don't see with the other wood types. There's also the fact that Azalea trees don't have normal saplings. While the saplings of other trees will eventually grow into a tree after so many game ticks, the Azalea needs to be bone mealed in order to grow into an Azalea tree. Does that remind you of anything? Crimson and warped fungi. It doesn't matter how long you wait, unless you bone meal them, they will never grow into huge fungi. Given that similarity, wouldn't it be interesting if, like crimson and warped planks, Azalea planks looked like they resembled one of the dye colors? It seems unlikely that we will see this in 1.17, but it could be a feature that Mojang would add later on, perhaps as part of a plant update. After all, how long did it take to get dyeable beds? So what color would Azalea planks be? I have no idea, but part of me thinks it would be hilarious if Mojang decided that it was the brown dyed wood substitute. Could it be pink because of the flowers? I don't think so, because I think they're saving pink for when they add the mulip, as per my previous video. Guess we'll have to wait and see. But back to discussing doors and trapdoors. If having duplicate colors of wood is not how we'll be getting a solid oak door or a warped door with cutouts, what's the alternative? What if the version that had cutouts used 6 slabs in its crafting recipe instead of 6 whole blocks? After all, the crafting recipe for wooden slabs does give you 6 of them, so there wouldn't be any waste. They could then keep the original crafting recipe of 6 whole blocks for the solid versions of doors. This same principle could then be applied to the trapdoors as well. So where does this leave the mushroom stems? I'm not sure, because I perceive 2 possibilities that are equally likely. The first is that the difference between mushroom stems from brown and red mushrooms is indeed temporary, and Mojang will just have the stems of both supply white wood. This could explain why they stack in Java and are no longer considered different from each other. The second option is that the stems of one mushroom will supply white wood, while the other will supply light gray. After all, both of those colors are on mushroom stem blocks. Perhaps they would use the stems of red mushrooms for white wood, since red mushrooms also have these white spots, but I will admit that is a weak argument. The reason why I consider this second possibility as being equally possible is the fact that Bedrock Edition still tracks the difference between the stems of the 2 mushrooms. However, I am still curious about the chiseled and smooth purpur blocks. I think their existence further supports the third conclusion I had stated in my previous video. The next major update to Minecraft could be an end update. Once I have that video done, you will find it on the end screen. But if I haven't made it yet, feel free to check out the first video I made in this series. Until next time, take care.